私、春が好きだ。
2012's fall anime season was full of incredible series that cannot be understated in influence. From the breathtaking thrills of Psycho Pass, to the infamous ecchi harem anime To Love Through Darkness, and the airing of a particular vampire anime and its iconic ending theme. Yes, this is a JoJo's reference. However, none of these shows, despite the overwhelming influence that they had on the anime community as a whole, impacted my life the way that Tonari no Kaibutsu-kun, or My Little Monster in English, did. While not the only romance shoujo of the season to catch my attention, Say I Love You could be a video topic all on its own, it has certainly withstood the test of time in my heart for being one of the few stories with a cast I can truly relate to as someone who is neurodivergent. Now, I'm of course not implying that any of the characters are for sure neurodivergent, but rather that the manga's anonymous creator, Rabiko, created a cast with a variety of traits typically considered indicative of someone who is neurodivergent. I don't know if there's an audience for the video about this relatively small show with no resolution, but I wanted my first topic on here to be a discussion on something important to me. Spoiler warning, by the way, for an 11-year-old anime.
天下分け目の大抗争、極道たちの苛烈な縄張り争いが幕を開ける。
Oops, wrong show.
宿題があるので、もう帰ってもいいですか？クラスメートは、その後しばらく私をドライアイスと呼んだ。
In its 300-minute runtime, not including the OVA episode, the show follows Mizutani Shizuku and her relationship to classmate Yoshida Haru, as well as a few other friends, like Natsume Asako and Sasahara Sohei. Shizuku is an exceptionally bright young girl, driven to work hard for her education to achieve personal success later in life. While gifted in the classroom, she finds it difficult to connect with her peers due to her apparent lack of empathy. However, that would be unfair to Shizuku to deny her any capacity for empathy. She simply struggles to show it for those she has not yet made a close personal connection with. This all begins to shift for her as she is forced to bring Haru homework since her teacher views her as reliable and he has been on suspension from school for picking a fight. He is a known truant and troublemaker and has not gone to school in over 3 years. Initially, Haru intimidates and confounds her, but she unintentionally makes an impression on him. After telling Haru that he should come back to school, Shizuku finds herself with a bothersome shadow, one that claims he has already fallen for her.
俺、雫がいるなら学校行ってみてもいい。
そりゃよかった。
なんかドキドキする。は？俺、雫が好きかも。
His insistence to get close to her causes her to feel frustrated, until she ultimately begins to feel close to him, while he loses interest in her entirely. The show from then on is about Shizuku being able to break down her emotional walls and become the one to reach out to Yoshida for connection, and him learning what true compassion is beyond infatuation. Both of them overcome rather large hurdles in their social lives and school lives, which would have been impossible had they not met. That desire to connect with him spreads and infects other relationships in her life that she had not expected to form. Each of the 4 main cast members has moments throughout the 13-episode run that allow them to explore the ideas of emotional connection and the desire to be close to one another, from acquaintanceship to love.
あのね、春。ずっと一人だと人間は乾いちゃうの。
My Little Monster is not known for being a simplistic and emotionally shallow piece of art. On the contrary, fans of the series are drawn to it for its melodramatic and expressive dialogue, music, and direction. So much of the show focuses on the characters' individual drives to feel close to one another. As Shizuku says in the 2nd episode titled, Weird, I've never been close to another human before. While she struggles to come to terms with the annoyance of her infatuation with Haru, her narration and burgeoning friendships with Sasahara and Natsume are tools to demonstrate her relationships with others and how she lacks the understanding of loneliness that her friends experience empathy for. It's not until she comes to understand how they can feel that she slowly begins to learn how they think. This is common as a theme for coming-of-age stories, the idea that you would want to make connections and expand your world. What's different here, however, from the perspective of Shizuku as a protagonist, this growth of paradigm and experience is one that she doesn't have a desire for herself in the beginning. Instead, she adopts that desire from those around her, as they show her what she couldn't see was missing. Haru, on the other hand, as a deuteragonist, demonstrates for the audience the exact opposite extreme. He is a character driven entirely by his desire to be liked and form connections, despite his outward shell of intimidation that he uses to feel safe. Perhaps it is because of this that Haru is able to reach Shizuku and pull her into understanding what it means to have companionship. Since Haru is quick to violence, at most points in his life, even though he tries to do what he feels is right, he ends up ostracized. People, except Shizuku, fear him because they don't understand his behavior. Although she doesn't really get him either, she does her best to bridge that gap and hold him responsible at the same time. As the series goes on, Shizuku and Haru both strive to fill the space that is left inside from their respective childhood trauma, and make new positive relationships with people they feel they can trust. As each of them surrounds themselves with more nuanced connections and learns to form bonds with people beyond the surface level they are comfortable with, they also learn more about connecting to each other. This isn't all well developed in the anime, since the season ends without closure, but it's not unnoticed either. One could say that the character development is the biggest draw of the show's audience.
私ね、勉強だけは負けたことなかったの。
次は新入生の挨拶。
でもその役目は私じゃなかった。
Arguably, the most important theme of the show is success in relation to hard work. This is the backbone of Shizuku's character, her driving motivation through the show. She wants academic success, and in her eyes, that means being the top of the class, no matter how much studying that requires her to undertake. However, her first year in high school is riddled with what she feels is failure on her part, coming in second to Haru. Having spent all of middle school being homeschooled, he used much of that time without friends, studying by himself, all the way through the high school material. Knowing all of that material already, he gets perfect scores on each exam, with no effort to maintain his grades. This is one of the main conflicts of the story, as Shizuku sees him as an opponent educationally. Haru, on the other hand, views success in a different context, not tied to academics, but tied to social capital. This is particularly shown in a gag where Haru wants to be elected class leadership and no one nominates him, despite his attempt at looking the part by wearing fake glasses for the day. His typical rambunctious and violent outbursts make others so wary of him that Haru is often left out in life. This leads him to pester Shizuku while she tries to study, mostly in an attempt to get her to drop the books in exchange for excitement.
だから俺は見上げるばかりだ。
Haru sees himself as flawed, with no reason to deserve affection or have his feelings returned. To him, he is the criminal from the spider's thread, for whom Buddha offers salvation via a string to climb, and Shizuku is Buddha. Both of them have their ideals thrust on them from maternal figures in their lives, Shizuku from her busy office-working mother, and Haru from his late aunt. Almost all interactions Shizuku has with her mom is her asking if she is still working hard, something that warps her into believing that she must be the best academically for her mom's work to be worth it. There is not a single scene where we actually see her mom's face. We only know of her existence through fax messages, phone calls home, and a flashback of her leaving for work. Haru is conversely haunted by Aunt Kyoko's last words to him, about finding someone whose presence soothes his pain. This dynamic of opposing goals and ideas of success are what make the show such an interesting drama, a tug-of-war between schoolwork and distractions.
ああ、そう。春なのね。ま、頑張れよ、春。
Much of My Little Monsters episodes focus on specific factors of youth that the two main characters either feel they have no reason to care for or have had no chance to participate in prior. While typical for a slice of life, high school drama in anime, the difference that can be seen when it comes to this show is how both Shizuku and Haru see these events. While Haru typically looks forward to such cliche events from other anime, like his fantasies of summer break with his newfound friends, when it comes to the actual experiences, he either reverts to his defensive mannerisms, as he does at the offline meetup with Natsume, or he doesn't fully grasp what the intended experience is, as shown by the watermelon smashing scene. This lack of understanding of what social experience is supposed to be is shared by Shizuku. Note how she has no idea how they're supposed to smash the melons either. Contrary to Haru, however, she has no idea what to do during these moments because she lacks interest, rather than no prior exposure. Thus, the way Shizuku experiences this springtime of life is instead as one being constantly pushed out of her comfort zone, into fresh new experiences, and finding them more appealing and coincidentally valuable than she previously estimated. She comes to learn just how much of life she was missing out on, and starts to desire and focus on such things previously deemed frivolous. This can be seen impacting her to the point that she no longer knows how to balance her life, as her feelings for Haru and the distractions of social life are new to her. She decides that she was wrong to let them influence her. After making it clear she felt they were superfluous things to spend time on, she finds saying it out loud wasn't enough to change how she now desires that companionship. One particular example is her turning to Nagia to relieve her jealousy. The pet rooster, who prior to Haru intervening, would never have piqued her interest to the point she'd view him as an outlet or a companion. It's in delivery of these themes of isolation, success versus effort, and yearning during youth, that My Little Monster makes use of neurodivergent traits in its characters.
彼女のこと、彼のこと、彼女のこと、彼のこと、
てめえ。
そして彼のこと。
I suppose I've spent enough time talking about the ways the story utilizes characters with neurodivergent traits, and I should probably start explaining what specifically about certain characters fits that description. Though almost all of the examples of this can be seen in Shizuku and Haru, a few other characters exhibit some signs or characteristics of neurodivergence as well. For example, Oshima Chizuru, the class 1A representative, who Haru protects from bullies in episode 4, Yoshida Yuzan, Haru's older brother that he hates, and Yamaguchi Yamakin Kenji, one of Haru's acquaintances and rival to him romantically. Each of them has their own quirks that couldn't be called neurotypical.
ここにいると息が詰まる。自分がどんどん価値のない人間に思えて。
Oshima as a character is introduced as almost an expected stereotype in anime, a trope of a shy, nerdy, soft-spoken introvert girl with black hair and glasses. However, after she is protected by Haru from third-year students, we get to see things from her perspective a little more, and she becomes more of a three-dimensional character. Despite being elected as class representative, with her believing it was on account of wearing glasses, she has very few friends. She missed the first week of classes and felt overwhelmed from a social standpoint, with everyone having already formed groups and cliques. As someone who has struggled with bouts of depression, I can relate to the hopelessness that Oshima comes to feel as well. When we first hear from her perspective, it's in an instance where she describes the isolation she feels socially, and how she feels stifled by her surroundings. She can be seen as a character who experiences intense anxiety and depression. She is pessimistic and timid, and is willing to sacrifice what she wants for the sake of not upsetting others. This mostly comes in the form of her setting her own feelings aside, for Haru and Shizuku to become closer. Oshima herself developed a crush on Haru after the incident with the upperclassmen, yet he remains oblivious to her emotions towards him. Haru does take notice of her kindness and friendship with him, and does his best to be a positive relationship in her life. He describes her as someone who struggles with the height of expectations, and notices how it has affected her mental state. This, of course, doesn't completely help her get over her social anxieties and depression, but it does give her hope of making new friends and connections. Outside of her meek and timid attitude, Oshima isn't exactly socially inept. It's just that, more often than not, she's unable to realize when those with more social skills take advantage of her. This is a relatively common trait found in neurodivergent people as well. We tend to offer ourselves up to be treated poorly in an attempt to gain social standing. While not exclusive to those that are neurodivergent, bullying out of a capability difference concerning social cues is more likely with groups that feel ostracized.
え、お互い恋愛感情まるでなし？いつも一緒にいて？本当？
Yoshida Yuzan, Haru's estranged older brother, is another character that can be seen throughout the show exhibiting neurodivergence. Particularly, there's a strong tie between him and the autistic trait of hyperfixations, his being his notable obsession with sweets.
日本には古来より四季をめでるという風習があるよね。甘味にもそれに通じる精神が根底に流れていると思うんだ。例えば俺はデザートといえば生クリームたっぷりのケーキとかタルトとか好きだけど、夏にはやっぱりムースかジュレ系のものが食べたくなるよね。目にも涼やかで綺麗だし、冷たいお菓子といえば忘れられない味があってさ、昔一度だけ食べたことあるんだけど、トルコの伝統菓子でバクラバってデザート、パイの生地にたっぷりのシロップが染み込ませてあって、噛むと口の中にとろりと。なんか話してたら甘いもの食べたくなってきちゃったね。春はさ、全然甘いものに興味がないとか言っちゃって、やっぱり我慢できない。ちょっとここで待ってて、しずくちゃん。甘いものを買ってくるから。
ただ甘いものの話をしに来たんだろうか。
お待たせ。ごめんね、ちょっと並んじゃった。一度食べてみたかったんだよね、ここのドーナツ。うちの方になくてさ。
His love of trying and categorizing new desserts is probably his most defining characteristic, outside of his vague, off-putting relationship with Haru. In fact, I would consider his hyperfixation one of the strongest examples of neurodivergent traits in the show. Some other small moments of characterization let us know that he is as oblivious as his brother socially, without the violent tendencies, and just as gifted with intelligence. When he is first introduced, Yuzan is meant to be representative of Haru's abusive childhood and its grip on his life. Both of them were raised by their strict and manic father, whose whims and mood swings they were both victims of. While Haru ran away from home to escape it and ended up adopted by his aunt, Yuzan felt he had no choice but to become his father's pawn and do what was expected of him to survive in this household. He urged Haru to do so as well, telling him that it was what they needed to do in that house. This manipulative side of him is a big part of his role narratively, as he can be seen as a sort of antagonist or obstacle to Haru and Shizuku's relationship. He was sent by his father to manipulate Haru into returning home, although he takes a chance to achieve his own goals instead by allowing Haru to stay. There are a multitude of scenes showing just how much Haru takes to heart what Yuzan's behavior towards him is, but none more poignant than Haru's flashback sequence in episode 11. In it, we see just how much changed between the boys as they grew up, as well as the calculated nature of Yuzan becoming more prominent.
自分より頭の悪い人間を見てると面白いだろな。バカな奴ら見てると面白いだろ哀れで。
Yamaguchi Kenji is a pompous, arrogant, and rude boy. And I wish that was all I had to say about him. Sadly for me, we have to address some traits of his too, as he makes a second antagonist that could be described as possibly neurodivergent. Yamaken is likely a representation of someone with high-functioning autism spectrum disorder. The kid isn't as honest to a fault as Shizuku or Haru, but is still unable to give or take hints. Most of his scenes, especially in the episode named after him, feature his inner dialogue as he plans and analyzes every aspect of his social interactions. More often than not, this is prior to him making any attempt to express his feelings, and he ends up late to the jump. While not the only character with this internal dialogue, Shizuku has plenty of introspective moments throughout the show. He is given more comedic moments surrounding the awkward social outcomes from this behavior. Since we hear Yamaken constantly critique his conversations with Shizuku and his reactions to the conclusions he arrives at. Some of these result in public outbursts, which leads another side character, Miyama Yu, to find him odd and foolish. Another major aspect of Yamaken's character, however, and why I've labeled him as an antagonist, is his superiority complex.
俺は自分という人間に非常に満足している。何不自由なく育ち、親や周りの期待を一身に受け、難なくそれに応えてきた。
He has spent a majority of his life in privilege, believing himself elite. When we first meet him, he has been friends with Haru for a considerable amount of time, at least from Haru's perspective. But we quickly see that he's just been using Haru as convenient muscle and a cash source for his, for lack of a better term, underlings. He is constantly accompanied by 3 other boys who fight his battles for him and provide entertainment. His drive to be number 1 is less about being motivated internally, but more about circumstance, leading him to believe he should have everything handed to him on a platter by birthright. This slowly changes throughout the show. Growing up knowing Haru, he considered the wild boy beneath him for a long time. This makes him envious of his relationship with Shizuku, who he develops his own feelings for, to his dismay. After accepting that he fell for the study bug, as he calls her, he becomes a romantic rival to Haru, albeit not one to be taken seriously. Almost all moments where another show would make the heroine wishy-washy and indecisive for the sake of a love triangle give way to a moment where we see clearly that Shizuku is either unconcerned with Yamaken's existence or really only interested in Haru. The only reason this could be called a traditional love triangle is that Yamaken sees it as a competition with Haru and vice versa. He feels he would never lose to Haru in anything, despite historically placing lower on exams. Thus he acts as a sort of foil to Haru, someone more like Shizuku in nature, who the audience can believe would have a more stable relationship if he were with her, while still being able to understand why she is uninterested in him on a deep level.
そうか。わかりゃいいんだよ、わかりゃ。
What can be said to explain the character of Yoshida Haru? In writing this video, I myself struggled to find the words that would give form to the features that make the man. The aspects of him that appear neurodivergent cannot be applied to autism, as I have with his brother or Yamaken. Instead, I think they more align with the behaviors commonly associated with borderline personality disorder, or BPD. Haru is temperamental, sure, but not in a way that someone with anger issues is. Rather, he assesses people as positive or negative with essentially no space in between. He believes Yamaken and his lackeys to be friends and trustworthy until they mock him behind his back. When Shizuku first insults them, he instantly thinks she's awful and is rude to her, going so far as to pour a drink over her head. It's all or nothing for him, in a different way than it is for Shizuku. As he continues to be like this throughout the show, flipping back and forth on people, as he gets or doesn't get what he wants from them. Almost all of his behavior is informed by selfishness. For example, his feelings coming first over Shizuku's when it comes to romance. At one point, he claims only he is making sacrifices for their relationship. This isn't to say Haru is by any means a bad person. He stands up to bullies and does his utmost to connect with others and make real friends. Rather, Haru never matured from the childlike ideals of what makes a friendship, and having missed years of social development, must struggle to overcome the hurdle of bridging his understanding to accurate social expectations. The evidence for him being a representation of BPD traits mostly ends with that aspect, but that's because the rest of his neurodivergent traits also align with autism. He's extremely perceptive and intelligent due to childhood filled with abusive trauma. He makes friends with animals easier than humans, and he's clueless about social cues and situations, such as not knowing he scowls and glares constantly. Many cast members feel he is overly reactive and dramatic about small issues, particularly Shizuku. Haru is also surprisingly level-headed at times about his dynamics with other people.
迷惑なんかじゃねえよ。俺だって雫が好きだ。でも俺のは多分雫の気持ちとは違う。それが分かったら雫は離れていくんじゃねえかって思った。
He's uncomfortable in front of a camera lens, is casual about staying overnight at Shizuku's, and receives the highest grades without trying. All of these aspects point towards either type of neurodivergence. It's also important to note how he will often overplan for things, like helping Oshima make friends, or becoming class representative himself. Some small amount of evidence points towards the possibility of ADD, ADHD as well.
勉強は楽しかった。スルスルと問題が解けていくのは面白かったし、頑張った分だけ返ってくるから。
Shizuku. Dry ice. Study bug. A girl concerned with only logic and understanding. Someone who finds any social capital wasted unless it furthers her success. The very picture of a valedictorian student. Mizutani Shizuku demonstrates a number of autistic traits, from her gift for STEM, being highly routine dependent, and, in particular, treating real-life problems like math equations, to the logical processing of emotions. She has many quirks and idiosyncrasies that are typically considered related to ASD. She takes great pride in being recognized for stuff she puts effort into, like her cooking skills and schoolwork, but she often fails to notice other people's efforts around her until they are spelled out to her.
私予備校寄ってきてもいいだろうか。付き合いますよ。
いいよ。
なんでこの人たちは団体で行動したがるんだろう。
Other people constantly surprise Shizuku, as she doesn't understand their behavior and can't recognize her own emotions until they're addressed.
そうか。これ焼き餅か。
These things don't hinder the ever-determined and stubborn protagonist from doing her best to understand. Her pursuit of knowledge is clearly the driving factor behind her character growth, as she starts to treat her connections with others as problems with solutions, rather than enigmas to avoid.
人は不安になると人に触れたくなるらしい。触っていい？
は？
For a long period of the series, Shizuku considers unknown feelings undesirable. They're distractions from her main goals. As she's learning to balance fixations, she stumbles through interactions with others, and she finds herself slipping behind on her studies.
なんで勝てない。次は私が勝つ。
そうか。じゃあ俺も頑張んねえとな。
This leads her friends to think that when she shifts her focus back to her studies, or she doesn't reach out for romantic advice, then she doesn't value them as much as they do her. This is of course not the case, as explained by Haru's cousin Mitsuyoshi.
しずくちゃんは単に人に相談ってこと自体考えがいかないだけじゃないの？今までそういう経験がなかったんでしょ？
She is also notably unaware of trends, and is mocked for that by others, most notably her plain and outdated wardrobe, dubbed granny clothes. This is accurate, as Yamakin mistakes an elderly woman for her on the street, to his embarrassment. Shizuku has lived a life of isolation, never reaching out, focused solely on living up to her mother's expectations for her. While not intentionally traumatizing her, Shizuku's mom has spent most of her childhood working away from home. The reason for it is that her father is unable to hold a steady, full-time job in the Japanese business world, but she is. She's placed many expectations on Shizuku, not just in keeping the household, but also to academically work hard. Her daughter took that to heart, believing she must be the best in order to live up to the ideals her mother has. This unintentionally leads Shizuku to being closed off emotionally from other children, and in elementary school earning the nickname Dry Ice. She makes many strides, however, in becoming a well-rounded and social person, despite her childhood of loneliness after meeting Haru. It feels to her as if he was sent to her to break her out of her shell, just as he feels she rescued him from his past. I probably spent way too long purporting selfish ideas about fictional characters with only circumstantial evidence, but it was something I felt like I needed to talk about. The reason I fell in love with My Little Monster is because of these incredibly well-written and uniquely personified cast members, all of whom share deep and relatable introspective moments with the audience. Whether or not the characters were meant to be representations of neurodivergence in many forms, they certainly allowed me to see myself in them. Now, I'm not a doctor or expert on the matter by any means, but I hope you could come to understand how I view this cast of characters that I've come to love in a new light. If you've never heard of the series and spent all this time listening to me, please find the time to support it on either Crunchyroll or HiDive. If you're a fan of the show and just wanted to find someone actually talking about it, I'm grateful you spent so much time listening to this. Please like and subscribe if you enjoyed hearing my musings about a high school melodrama anime. I plan to make many more videos in the future about topics and media that has impacted me, and hopefully will or has impacted you. Thank you for watching.